DeShaun Tate back here with you, the final buzzer. Wow, we have so much to talk about here tonight in a short span. I promise it's going to be a very short span here tonight. The final buzzer with DeShaun Tate, episode 5, I believe it is. We do this every Monday through Friday to recap the games from that particular day. So today, obviously, will be a recap of Game 2 from Miami upsetting the Milwaukee Bucks and the Houston Rockets taking down the Oklahoma City Thunder. And man, I'm telling you like this, before we even kick this thing off, because we're not going to get into a whole bunch of stats and different stuff tonight. Before we kick this thing off, let me make sure I say this. Using this as a little bit of a different kind of platform to push and press for make sure that you subscribe to the podcast, Tate's Take the Podcast, where basketball lives. Find that anywhere you find your favorite podcast, streaming live on YouTube as well. Make sure you subscribe to that. Now, at Tate's Take Hoops, TATESTAKEHOOPS, where basketball lives. This has been such magnificent basketball, and why in some cases I feel like, it could tend to be a little bit sloppy from time to time. This has been outstanding. Like if you're one of those Trump supporters, nothing against you, totally up to you. But if you're listening to him and he's telling you don't buy into basketball stuff, the NBA and what they've got going on right now, it's not America's way, or the whole of politics and everything else that's going on, you're missing out on outstanding basketball. If you were somebody that was like me and you were missing out on March Madness this past year, you're getting your March Madness fix right now. You had 2 back-to-back nights of Game 7s that literally went down to the wire. You had 2 games here on tonight that were one-possession games, ended in one possession, 2-point games. It's just been phenomenal basketball all across the board. Like it, love it, hate it, or anything in between. I just think that it's been absolutely phenomenal. Let's start off with the very first game of the night, where you have the Milwaukee Bucks as a 1 seed, taken down by number 5 seed, the Miami Heat, in the Eastern Conference semifinals. Game 2, that is 116-114. Miami now leads 2-0. Let's take a look at Milwaukee first. Let's get through that, and then we'll get to Miami. Milwaukee, we know that Eric Bledsoe returned. He was big for them, bigger piece than I personally thought that he was going to be. I thought that this was this team that wasn't necessarily dead, because I don't think that the former Rookie of the Year and Malcolm Brogdon really made the team. But you can definitely tell within this series where they kind of miss him. Eric Bledsoe's pretty good, but he's not Malcolm Brogdon by any stretch of the imagination. Was kind of curious to know where the bench production and firepower was going to come from for the Milwaukee Bucks. When you start talking about guys like Dante DiVincenzo, who was essentially this Final Four phenomenon just 2 years ago on that Villanova team, hasn't really come into the NBA outside of being on the IR quite a bit and really contributed a whole lot outside of pure athleticism. Between he and another guy, pure athleticism, Pat Connaughton, 2 guys that they really have relied upon entering the season to shoot the basketball well for them, have not done so, not just in the bubble, but certainly within the NBA playoffs. You're talking about shooters, guys that have not stepped up and showed any kind of consistent or persistent offensive contribution, that being veteran players, Ersan Ilyasova, Kyle Korver. Where are those guys when you need a bucket from the outside? They didn't have either one of those guys. I feel like they kind of are lacking to embrace a physical style of basketball. That's what Miami seems to be. That's what Milwaukee seems to be. And that's what Miami seems to be capitalizing on as the more physical team, the more hungry team, the team that's getting after it a whole lot more. That might be an extent from Coach Budenholzer. I'm not really sure, but just by the way that it seems, I've seen this style and brand of basketball before, obviously covering the Atlanta Hawks, where he was formerly the head coach and coach of the year for them within the NBA. So it looks like it's somewhat of an extension of that. Brook Lopez, Chris Middleton need to be big for them. Obviously, Brook Lopez not as much as Chris Middleton, who did step up and wasn't nearly the disappearance. And Giannis Antetokounmpo, who played much better, which I'm not sure that that's really saying much, played better than he did just the other day, yet still not doing something that I would have liked to see. We'll talk about those comments from just the other night. I kind of sense in a way that you know, Milwaukee is trying to force a lot. They're forcing Giannis Antetokounmpo into situations where he's not comfortable, or Miami is. A collective unit. Collectively, I think they both are, and it's really forcing Giannis to put himself in those type of positions in situations that he really can't control. He's being out of control. He's in penetration situations. The IQ just really doesn't tend to really be there for him. And I think that that's where he kind of have some ways to go. So where people was talking about the best players in the game, when you're talking about LeBron James, one of the best scorers prolifically ever in the history of the game, you're talking about Kevin Durant, you're talking about Kawhi Leonard, who's arguably the best two-way player, maybe not in the history of the league, but certainly within this era of the league. So many people ready to put Giannis Antetokounmpo in that same conversation, looking like he could potentially be as he's a reigning MVP, a back-to-back MVP, defensive player of the year this year. So with that defense and that offensive mindset, one thing that you cannot teach length, you cannot teach size. The old NBA was all about the size. It was about big players, bulky players, that kind of size. Now it's more about finesse, athleticism, length, all of those types of things. And where he does check all of those boxes, I can't necessarily go as far as saying that he is in the same conversation with those guys. I want to give you guys the opportunity to jump in on some of this with me if you feel the need. Of course, feel free to comment below with your questions and opinions per usual. And as you can see now on the bottom of the ticker is where you can kind of chime in and get up in this thing with us before we get up out of here in the next couple minutes. But that's kind of where I see things kind of setting up for Giannis Antetokounmpo right now, putting him in foul trouble situations. It's kind of creating quite a bit of frustration for him as well. One of the issues that I had with him in the post game the other night was when a reporter asked why he wasn't checking Jimmy Butler, who had 40 points that night. It seemed like he was on fire and like he couldn't miss. That was one of my biggest issues. And his reply was, why would you even ask that question? Probably because you're the defensive player of the year. Probably because you have the longest arms in the world. Probably because you have all these accomplishments and such, to where we expect to see the best players on the best players, or the best players on the best player that night of whoever has the hot hand. We have not seen that. We've seen Jay Crowder on him quite a bit more than anything else. Speaking of Jay Crowder and Jimmy Butler, those being two guys, two Marquette guys, two Midwest institution type guys that don't get nearly the recognition sometimes I think that they should deserve, especially in terms of the backcourt. I add an Andre Iguodala to that same list of guys, and then you have something that is kind of overlooked when it comes to perimeter defense. So they're certainly doing a good job on Giannis. Why isn't Giannis able to guard some of those guys? He says he's going to do whatever the coach wants him to do. Well, sometimes you have to put the coach in his place on the side and say, I want to go after the best player and prove the coach wrong. And that's where you kind of develop and establish that trust a little bit more within your coach. And that's a lot of times what determines whether you'll win championships or not, if I'm being quite honest. So you got to go with the guy with the hottest hand. Not really sure where that IQ of his is necessarily, but I know one thing that happened for this Milwaukee team is that they went nearly 4 minutes without a basket, and that's a huge contributing part as to why they did not win this game. You start looking at the different areas and departments, categories in which they were outscored from. How about from three? 37% for Miami, 28% from Milwaukee. And I'm not going to bore you guys to sleep with a whole bunch of stats, but these are some of the little things that I think that you should kind of circle on your calendar or highlight when you're going back and looking at some of these games. From the assist category, 22-16 may not seem like a lot. 6 assists in a game, especially certain ones that come off of turnovers, can certainly make a huge difference as well. How about steals? Miami stole the ball double the amount of the times that that Milwaukee did, 12-6. And then we start talking about the bench points. We go back to that bench production, 36 points off the bench for Miami, 26 for Milwaukee. Now let's get into Miami and why they're winning some of these games a little bit. When you start talking about the look and their confidence. They had that look of confidence. They had that look of comfort early into the game. They are not afraid. They are not scared. They kind of had, it seems like they're walking into this whole thing with a similar or same mentality as did Oklahoma City, although one came out successful and the other one didn't. Start talking about Bam Adebayo, who is just an absolute monster. I told you before, I made some of these same comparisons of him between kind of like a Ben Wallace with that big bulky build, yet still very athletic and has a motor that can, it's like dude can run like a deer almost. He's getting up and down in transition, offensively, defensively, the whole nine. No secret as to why he's the runner-up for the most improved player in the NBA this year. I was wondering what would be the likelihood of somebody like a Tyler Hero, Duncan Robinson, Kendrick Nunn, who hasn't necessarily played all that great. Now you're talking about adding guys like Goran Dragic, who not only last game, but also this game was kind of like the unsung hero of the team. What are the chances that they will have underachieving games all together at the same time? Likelihood, probably not all that great, especially with the way that Milwaukee is playing. But is that something that it will take in order to win? Shutting down the other guys, shutting down the shooters. All of those guys are shooters. And Kendrick Nunn has been non-existent throughout the course of this entire playoffs, if I'm being quite honest. That's something that you got to have, especially if you're calling yourself the best defensive team in the NBA, which a lot of people have said that Milwaukee is that. Statistically or not, that has been told multiple times, and it's been proven, but it's not been proven in the playoffs. And I'm afraid that this is something that a lot of people were afraid of and considering when I was asking people before, who are you taking, Milwaukee or the field? And so many people wanted to take Milwaukee, but they took the field for some of the same reasons that we're seeing in the NBA right now. One of the things I really felt like Milwaukee needed to do to Miami is force Jimmy Butler to be a perimeter shooter. I'm not talking about at the end of the game where they fouled him. And I don't know what's going on with the NBA with some of these little ticky-tack fouls where you're just barely touching a guy. And then they're all of a sudden blowing the whistles and going back and reviewing plays and so forth. A lot of it you do want to make sure you get right. But what happened to the old NBA where it was like whatever the referee called, that's what you had to rely upon. Sometimes I think that the replay center and the great job that Steve Javie is doing being in that position is really doing a benefit. But sometimes I think that it ultimately does a disservice in some occasions. For a guy who's shooting 24% being Jimmy Butler from three-point range, you do want to put him in situations where he has to shoot the ball from the perimeter, and instead of not allowing him to do it, but allowing the other guys that I just mentioned before that, the Robinsons, the Nunns, the Heroes, and the Dragic, those guys to shoot the three. It just seems like it's really not making out to be for a good brand of basketball. If you're Milwaukee right now, their back is up against the wall. There's quite a bit of pressure on those guys. And in addition to that, you decide that you are going to then check Jimmy Butler from three, who shoots 24%. You're going to foul him at the very end of the game, and then he goes on and shoot free throws at the very end. It just doesn't really make a whole lot of sense to me. Bad coaching. And if I'm just being honest, everybody's talking about coach of the year between Nick Nurse, who's down 0-2, a guy like Billy Donovan playing Billy ball, who they have no reason to hang their heads. They're doing exceptionally well. We'll get to them in a second. But he was certainly in the coach of the year running as well. But in that same respect, you definitely have Mike Budenholzer, another guy who's down 0-2. Where was Eric Spoelstra in this whole conversation? Never getting that opportunity to get Coach of the Year award. And I think that the NBA kind of realized that was a huge mistake. And a lot of people are kind of finding this underappreciation for a guy like an Andre Iguodala, the AI 2.0, not Allen Iverson, but Andre Iguodala. I really don't think that they did that. I think that he's done himself quite a bit of service being a leader on that team, understanding why he didn't mind getting out of Memphis to go over and play with the Miami Heat to bring some defense, bring a little bit of offense from time to time, but really bringing some of that championship pedigree over from when he came over from Golden State. So when you're looking at also Jimmy Butler, again, last but certainly not least, he misses the free throws. Okay, he misses free throws. He had critical turnovers, like he threw it up towards the backboard and turned the ball over and almost lost the game that way. He gets all the way to the free throw line where essentially his stomach where his stomach had to, drop down to his nuts in a certain, if you can even fathom thinking about what that feels like. It takes a lot of pressure. That people tell you all the time, pressure busts pipes. That's what happened. We saw that Danilo Gallinari, amongst a couple others, were not able to do that here on tonight. We'll get to them. But Jimmy Butler was, and he sank the 2 free throws when they needed them the most, and that's what counted the most. Now let's get to this other game, Oklahoma City against the Houston Rockets, where we didn't see, James Harden particularly have a great game. We didn't see Russell Westbrook particularly have a great game. Somebody that did, but unfortunately is going home a little bit early, and I was just swearing up and down to myself, really, really hoping that it was going to get to a point where OKC ended up coming out winners in this game, because of the simple fact that you trade the guy. He already couldn't have his way at one point where David Stern tried to put not tried, but he did put a stop to, maybe, I think it was Chris Paul maybe going to the Lakers or something like that, kind of had to settle for the Los Angeles Clippers at that time and didn't get anything out of it. Unfortunately, it looks like he is going to be a guy that's going to end up walking out of the NBA when that time comes, without a championship. As unfortunate as that may be, I don't think anybody questions that he's the best leader in the game at this time. Checking in, a couple people checked in. Actually, one person checked in, but a couple of times. I want to make sure I show him some love. Derek Crush Boyd checked in with us, and Jimmy Butler is making his statement. He is thorough but stands firm on his play, and Miami is a sleeper for the finals. That's the way that it's looking. And the closer that we got to this series, and especially now 2 games in, many people are saying the same thing. Derek Crush Boyd also saying they are loaded and solid as far as starting 5 in the bench play and play defense. When Jimmy Butler is on and they are all in sync together, Miami is tough to beat, and that they can beat Boston. While that definitely seems to be the case, Boston is right there as well. Between those 2 teams, they're arguably or inarguably at this point the 2 teams that have, I don't know if they're the 2 best teams, but they're the 2 teams that have played the best so far since the not necessarily the resumption of the NBA in the regular season, but certainly within the playoffs. And then last but certainly not least, Derek Crushboard also saying that Milwaukee has to play to their strength rather than adjusting to Miami, because Miami has a strong 5 that can adjust to most teams' plans. And they're scary because they can play 10 to 11 players deep on the court. And I could agree with him any more than I am right now. I mean, that just clearly seems to be the way that they're going with this whole thing, and I think it's phenomenal and good for the Miami Heat. Kind of playing that underdog role, playing with house money, and they're going out there feeling like they're supposed to win this battle, just like Boston is. And I think that that's great for 2 teams that are not seated as high as their opponents. Getting back to OKC, Chris Paul being the oldest player with a triple-double in NBA playoff history. Congrats to him. And not that I questioned his leadership, not that I questioned his skill set, but I was really kind of curious and doubting how much he really had in the tank. And he's really shown me a lot with what he's been able to do and carry a young team that's really not all that good, a team that had 1.4% to make the playoffs when the beginning of the season started. Lou Dort. Okay, let's go ahead and address this right now, because I was right along with everybody else, sending emojis of laughing, crying, laughing faces and everything else to Lou Dort, or about Lou Dort, who had a horrible game. I think shot 3 for 16 the other night and a few nights ago from the field, and went 0 for 9 from 3 and just 6 points. It looked like vomit all over your screen. Okay. However, he had a chance to resurge and replenish, rejuvenate himself and his game, hitting big-time shots on tonight. I know he would have loved to have that one back against his mentor in James Harden, who both of these guys kind of similar build and play some of that bully ball to an extent. And obviously, Dort not nearly being the jump shooter that James Harden is, but he showed tonight that he knows that people were making fun of him, me included. While I would like to offer him an apology for poking fun at the way that he played the other night, tonight, most points scored by an undrafted rookie. He had 30 points, but while people may say, ha, Take that. Go laugh at that. Well, if I'm just being honest, okay? You're sitting back there with all the opportunity in the world to shoot, and you're shooting 50 times. I mean, people are leaving you wide open, not even 2 arms lengths to contesting or altering your jump shots. You should be able to do that, okay? But you got to give him credit for making the shot. That's what I do want to do. But he's not going to have that opportunity to show that anymore. And the future seems to maybe seem like it might be looking a little bright for him. I think he could turn into being a decent NBA player. A great one? Nah. A pretty good one? Not willing to go that far. A good one? Maybe. But a decent one, I can give him credit for that. You have to start somewhere, and I guess that's not too bad. 1 or 2 games coming off of 0 for 9 and 3 for 16 from the field. That's just where I'm going to go with that one. I talked to some people earlier today, and I'm just kind of picking people's brains and kind of seeing what they think and what the different mentalities are of different people who watch basketball and big time different, basketball heads. Which one is more important? Too much rest when it comes to the rest? Too much rest or not enough rest? Because you don't want to lose your groove. You do want to stay sharp and you do want to stay in rhythm. So where there are situations where you do have teams like the Denver Nuggets, who's going to be playing tomorrow, Game 1, just played 7-game series against the Utah Jazz. They're going up against one of the LA teams. 2 of 3 teams have the best record in the NBA. There's 2 teams in LA that have the best records in the West. This one specifically being the Clippers that they're going to be playing up against, who has the rest. This is what I don't understand about people who feel like the rest is a bad thing. You go to work every day. Now, granted, okay, we're not talking about putting miles and wear and tear on your kneecaps the same way that these basketball players and that these athletes are, okay? Let's just say, and this isn't a slight by any means or stretch of the imagination, okay? Let's just say that you work at McDonald's. You flip burgers, you shake fries. That's what you do for a living, okay? You do that every single day. Your wrists will hurt too. Your knees will hurt from standing for so long too. When you go home and you actually get that opportunity to pop up something cold to drink, kick your shoes off and kick your heels up and relax and rest, that's something we all need in life. That is what dictates your growth. That is what dictates what makes your mind properly work in the morning. All of these different things. Rest cannot be anything but good. And I'm curious to see if you guys kind of, if you're following me, to kind of chime in on something like that. Catch me on the Twitter, TATES, where basketball lives. That's Tate's Take Sports. I'm sorry, Tate's Take Hoops. Used to be sports. Tate's Take Hoops. So saying that, I believe that getting the rest is the right thing. These are guys that are not having to travel, okay? The traveling is cut out because they're all sitting there in a bubble, okay? Outside of that factor, we all need the rest. We all can use the rest. These guys, as much as you like to think that this isn't the case, they have lives just like everybody else. They have problems. They have bills. They have so forth. And I know people are going to say, well, you got all this money and you got people to do this for you and do that for you. But you're still human beings. It's still a brain. You don't just get all the more money in your bank account than everybody else, and all of a sudden your problems go away and you have nothing to worry about in life. People still have to use their rest. They're going up and down the floor every single night between practices and not social media, but interviews and just different things that you learn about players. If I could do it all over again, and I know what I know now, I probably wouldn't want to be an NBA player. After you get to realizing how much mental toughness that it takes and strain on the brain that it really takes for somebody, and taking care of your body and so forth, all of these different things, it can kind of turn things into where you're like regular civilian all over again. Your job is just different than everybody else's. And honestly, it's more wear and tear on your body than a lot of other people's jobs, with the exception of probably boxing and football, rugby, and amongst a couple other things. But saying that, I always feel like the rest is something that's better. These are 2 teams, being Denver in Houston that just got out of Game 7 series in the very first round. Now you're going to go up against arguably the two best teams in the NBA. So how many games do you think it goes? I think realistically, I could see both games going about 6 games, and that's probably max. I'm not sure that I could see the Houston Rockets going 7 games with the Los Angeles Lakers, nor seeing the Denver Nuggets go 7 games against the Clippers. And I know that they're professionals and this is what they get paid to do and all this other kind of stuff. But I just really do honestly and truthfully believe that the rest is always better. All of us, we all need the rest. So I'm really interested to see the way that this thing is going to turn out. Want to give you guys, as we get ready to conclude and get ready for tomorrow's games, I kind of want to give you guys a little bit of see that what we're looking at as far as tomorrow, because we got a whole new slate of games. This thing has a March Madness feel to it. I'm telling you, I'm excited as anybody else. I'm not sure how well I'm gonna sleep tonight. Probably not very well, because I'm still wired up and I still got the anxiety thing going on. So if you guys are sitting back and waiting on this football stuff that everybody loves so much, have at it. I'll have this basketball all day long. 94 feet long, 50 feet wide, 23 feet and 3/4 inches out on the perimeter with a 10 feet tall goal. 6:30 p Eastern Standard Time, you get the Toronto Raptors against the Boston Celtics. That is game 3. Boston leads that series 2-0. I tell you what, that backcourt is going to have to really step up, in addition to Pascal Siakam, that being Kyle Lowry and Fred VanVleet. This Boston team looks like that they're on a roll, much like this Miami team does. And then in the nightcap on the doubleheader, 9 p Eastern Standard Time, the number 3 seeded Denver Nuggets against the Los Angeles Clippers, who are a 2 seed. By the way, we just want to finish off here on that stat, because that's what you have to look forward to on tomorrow. This is the first time ever that seeds number 1 and number 2 within the same conference in NBA history are trailing 2-0. So before you start putting some of your bets out there, I want to leave you with this. Toronto on the line tomorrow. I'm not sure about the money line, but as far as the line and the spread, rather, on tomorrow, Toronto is a 1-point underdog. The over-under on that is 215. And for the Nuggets and the Clippers are Toronto is a 1-point favorite over the Celtics on tomorrow. 215 is the over-under. And, of course, the Clippers are a 8.5-point favorite as well, with a 223 over-under. So for any of you that are out there that like to, get your bets in there and whatnot, and look forward to making a little bit of money on those Vegas lines and so forth, that's something that you can look forward to as well. Appreciate Al High, I guess I'm saying it right, for checking in on Facebook, saying Lakers in 6. Pretty dope profile pic there, by the way, for checking in on us on social media. So he's taking the Lakers in 6. I can see that. I don't think I see 7 games. I think 5 might be too much of a stretch. I think that might be disrespecting Houston a little bit, but this is also a Houston team that couldn't close it out 2 years ago. With people say Chris Paul wasn't healthy and whatever, what have you. That's why Golden State took care of business. Well, how about last year when there was no Kevin Durant and Chris Paul was completely healthy? This is just not going to work. And I think that we're only so many days away, realistically, from Mike D'Antoni no longer holding that position and that title as the head coach of the Houston Rockets. And also, we talking about good buddies of mine, like a father to me. I'm trying to tell you the truth. Will Witherspoon saying that games every other day, it takes a toll. Look for a couple of blowouts from the LA teams, and that's a strong possibility. We could be getting ready to see blowouts. Keep my fingers crossed, toes crossed, eyes crossed, everything's crossed that we don't see that, because I love for some of these ratings to kind of skyrocket. But even if they don't, we're seeing some really competitive basketball, somewhat sloppy in some cases, but this is as high level basketball as it could possibly get. Last but certainly not least, before we conclude and get out of here, Derek Crush Boyd coming back and say it will be competitive it will be competitive. The Nuggets are more competitive than Dallas. And I think that will be something that will be interesting within its own right. And I can definitely agree to that. They've certainly got the offensive players. Not sure about the defensive players, but they got to find a way. Mike Malone's got to find a way to get Michael Porter Jr. back on the floor sometime. I mean, yesterday, not even seeing him really in the second half, that just wasn't a good look. And I wouldn't be mad if he's on his way out of there. Derek Crush Boyd, Al High, Will Witherspoon, appreciate you all for checking in with us. You can be like them also as well if you like anytime. Like I said, we do this recap every single night, Monday through Friday, after the very last game of the playoffs. So about 15 to 20 minutes after the last game concludes, we recap all the games for the day. Remember to subscribe to the podcast. You find it anywhere you find your favorite podcast, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Spotify, Red Circle, Stitcher, the whole nine. Just type in on that little search box. So if you got an iPhone, you don't have the Android, or you got the Android, you don't got the iPhone, we're accessible any and everywhere. No excuses from you people. Make sure that you go and subscribe. Just hover over that little magnifying glass right there in that search box. Put in Tate's Take, TATE''S, TAKE, and subscribe. Also streaming live on YouTube as well. I like to call it the most entertaining, most informational, most educational basketball content on the planet in the form of a podcast. So tell your mama, tell your grandmama, tell your aunties, tell your cousins, tell your friends, tell your family, tell your enemies, tell everybody. Until tomorrow around this same time after the last game concludes. I guess that's all for us on today. Be good, beautiful people.